Rainier Avenue Radio, your community radio station will provide you with more information. Rainier Avenue Radio.
All of us have struggled through the COVID-19 pandemic, and many of our communities have been particularly hard hit. Some things definitely need to change, but a few things should stay the same, like protecting your child from serious diseases you can prevent now. Preventable diseases like measles, mumps, and whooping cough. Is camp, childcare, or in-person school on your family's agenda? Give your child a healthy and safe summer and school year by making sure they're up to date on vaccinations and well child visits. You have the power to protect. Call your healthcare provider to find out what vaccinations your child is due for and make an appointment today. If you need help finding a provider, visit parenthelp123.org or call the Help Me Grow Washington hotline at 1-800-322-2588. An interpretation is available.
Hello, listener. What's important to you about what's going on in your community? Are you interested? Are you concerned? In any case, I invite you to tune into my show, Seattle Here and Now, on Rainier Avenue Radio App. Why? I will be covering a wide range of topics important to you and impacting the community. Each show will have a special guest or guests to share with you information on a variety of subjects that are happening here and now in Seattle. I promise I will work hard to make my show informative, interesting, and entertaining. Be sure to listen to Seattle Here and Now on Rainier Avenue Radio World.
And welcome to our live studio audience for another exciting edition of Did You Know? And here we go with round one. Did you know?
The COVID vaccine is free and easy to get. You don't need insurance or an appointment to get your vaccine. Vaccines are available at many locations near you.
And now we're going to double the value. Did you know?
The COVID-19 vaccine is always free of cost. You can visit pharmacies, community health centers, and other health providers in your neighborhood.
And now for the lightning round. Did you know?
The Delta variant of COVID is a mutation that has health experts worried because it's twice as contagious.
Then for our finale. Did you know?
The best way to protect yourself from the COVID Delta variant is to get fully vaccinated. Get your vaccine today.
Find out more at kingcounty.gov/vaccine. Did you know?
Điều kỳ diệu nào đó sẽ xảy ra khi bạn thắt dây an toàn. Đó là điều kỳ diệu khi chúng ta đặt điện thoại của mình ngoài tầm với, hoặc cung cấp thêm chỗ cho ai đó trên xe đạp của họ. Một hành động nhỏ dừng lại để ai đó băng qua đường. Đó là một vẻ đẹp. Ngay cả việc bắt xe về nhà sau khi uống rượu cũng rất anh hùng. Bởi vì tất cả những điều nhỏ nhặt đó đóng vai trò to lớn cho việc giữ an toàn cho chúng ta. Cùng nhau, chúng ta đến đó.
You are listening to Rainier Avenue Radio World. Don't forget to log on www.rainieravenue radio.world.
Welcome to Rainier Avenue Radio. This is Afternoons with Monique, recording live in Seattle, Washington, every Thursday at 1 p.m.
Good afternoon, Seattle. I'm not sure why you're not seeing me, but you see my green screen. Just a second. There you are. Good afternoon, Seattle. This is Monique Lee from the Afternoons with Monique show on Rainier Avenue Radio. We are on our 101 episode of the Afternoons with Monique show. We're in the middle of a beautiful heat summer, but the heat wave is hitting the nation pretty hard yesterday and today. So everyone, please stay hydrated and stay cool. Today we have a special episode with the law. One of my acquaintance, an appellate attorney by the name of Randy Baker. Now, the Court of Appeal and Appellate law is a very specialized area of the law. It's often is opaque and confusing. So most of the time, it attracts a small number of practitioners in the law. These are attorneys that are, in order to succeed at appellate law, you have to be good writers and good orators, and they would often have to write for the appellate court and sometimes Supreme Courts. Please welcome to Afternoons with Monique, appellate law attorney, Randy Baker.
Hi, good to be here.
Hi, Randy. So are you currently in California or in Washington?
I'm in Washington.
Okay, all right.
I usually work here. I practice in the courts down there a lot, though.
Very good. So I understand that you have been practicing law for over 20 years, and the majority of that is in appellate law. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes, except over 30 years. I'm old.
Over 30 years. Okay, you got to update your video. Okay.
Fair enough.
Yeah. And you've recently, not too recent, but recently moved your practice to Seattle, but primarily you used to practice in California. Is that correct?
I primarily still practice in California. However, I've been up in Seattle for about 25 years now.
Oh, okay.
One of the advantages of being an appellate lawyer is you can do almost all the work almost anywhere.
Very nice. Before we get to the details, the intricacies of appellate law, and I should preface what we have today. We have an hour, so there's plenty of time for us to get to know Attorney Randy Baker, and I am going to attempt to explore and educate and inform the public a little bit more about this area of the law where, not a lot of people know about, but at times at trial, maybe people don't feel like they're getting a just and fair outcome and wanted to know how they can change that. We're going to talk about how and the how and the what and the how much, and some statistics that educate and inform people about this area of law where Attorney Baker is very familiar with. But before we get into that, I would like to ask you a little bit about your background, where you're from, a little bit about your history, please.
Sure. I grew up in Chicago. I attended mostly private school. I attended college in Portland at Reed College. Then I spent a long time in graduate school and law school at Berkeley. I studied in Frankfurt, Germany, philosophy for a couple of years. I ended up writing a PhD on a philosopher, sociologist, and ended up doing appellate work sort of by chance. I had finished law school and was working on a PhD in sociology because I thought I might teach part-time, but I ended up not doing that. And a friend said, you can get court-appointed criminal felony appeals, and you only take as many as you have time for, which was perfect for writing a PhD. So that's how I started it and just stuck with it.
Now, I know that, yes, you just mentioned that, and I saw on your website also that you have a PhD in sociology. So you were going to teach, but I am sure, I took some sociology classes, and it's quite interesting. You must know some things in those extensive years of studies, PhD program, some stuff about society and people that most people don't know. So let me just dig into this area a little bit with your PhD from Berkeley in sociology. What did you learn there? Share with us some of the things that you know in this area. I'm just very curious that that other people like me, for example, don't typically know or get exposed to.
Well, that's a good question. Hopefully there's a few things. I'm not sure which in particular would be most interesting, except let me tell you broadly what sociologists do, and I don't agree with a lot of the discipline. My PhD relied a lot on people outside of the discipline, which is probably one reason I wasn't loved by sociology departments. But one thing I think sociologists do right is when they're examining why people do things, they don't focus on their toilet training or their personality, although, that's relevant stuff. They focus on the social groups they're in and the social conditions in which they operate. And I think that really is important and explains a lot. And let me give you a quick example, which kind of relates to what we're facing now in the United States. So, as we all know, Germany in the 1930s was taken over by the Nazis. And they were sort of voted into office, sort of meaning the Nazi party never got a majority of German votes. They got about a third, more or less. And what happened was other conservative parties, they had a parliamentary system, and other conservative parties joined with them. So they ended up with a majority in parliament. But what's interesting is, I think it was not until 1928 or 1930, something like that, very into the 20s, the Nazis were doing terrible. They were getting like 2% of the vote.
Right.
Germany's economy completely tanked, worse than ours. I mean, it was just ghastly. And Hitler's story was, go with me, I'm going to fix it. And by the way, the Jews did it, or the Jews and the, whatever, some other bad guys did it. We're going to get them and we're going to fix things. And suddenly there was an explosion of support for Hitler, enough so that he could bargain his way in. Fortunately, the US isn't there yet. And fortunately, our economy hasn't tanked like that yet. But there's been a movement, especially it's widely discussed, of white working class people to the Republicans and to Trump. And those folks have been kind of downwardly mobile. They're not starving or anything, but they're doing worse than they used to do. And the story Trump is giving is, the Mexicans did it, or the gays and lesbians, some stigmatized group, blame them. Right. Well, we got plenty of racism and homophobia here. Germany had anti-Semitism, but not to the point of gathering up Jews and murdering them. But under certain social conditions, these ugly messages resonate better. And I think that kind of insight, that's the kind of stuff sociologists do right, I think.
Interesting. So you studied in Frankfurt for a time. What's your connection there?
When I was in college, I read this German philosopher, social theorist named Jürgen Habermas. And Habermas taught in Frankfurt. So I got a fellowship to go there, and I wrote my PhD on him. There is kind of an amusing story about that I'll tell. It's kind of quick. So I kept applying when I was in graduate school for a Fulbright fellowship to study with him. I even had a letter from him saying, Baker's projects look interesting, I'll supervise them. And I kept getting rejected. They said, you don't know enough German. So I got a scholarship, spent a summer in Germany to learn more German. I knew I had passed the, 2-year university proficiency level in German. My law school had a fellowship just given to the law school for a law student to spend a year in Germany. I applied for it. I was denied the fellowship. And I knew my classmates were not really oriented towards intellectual stuff. They wanted to go out and be lawyers. So I called the head of the committee at Berkeley and I said, what's going on? No one else applied, did they? And he said, yes, that's true. No one else applied. And I said, okay, I know, I was qualified. Why didn't I get the fellowship? And he said, well, we found that Habermas doesn't really spend time with students when we send them there. So we thought this fellowship would be better used if we gave it to the School of Arts and Sciences and they could send someone. So I was a little stunned by this. And I ran into a German professor who I had become acquainted with. And I told him this story. And he said, that is utter garbage. What had happened was Habermas is very kind of lefty, loosely associated with Marxism. But anyhow, he taught at Berkeley shortly before I got there as a visiting prof. Apparently, people who were more conservative than him really disliked him and didn't want to give him a student. And so this German prof, when he heard the story, he said, don't worry. I happen to be personal friends with the president of the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to write you a recommendation because I think you're qualified for that. And I got that fellowship, which was a much better fellowship. So
that's how you end up at
nicely
Frankfurt. And this is after you already got your law degree. You didn't
Yes.
study sociology until after your JD.
Well, not exactly. I studied before and after.
Oh, really? Okay. So you have a very strong interest in philosophy, history, and sociology. The reason why I always ask my interview guest about their undergrad, because this is kind of like a inflection point of their life, you know, where they thought they were going to go in life, what attracted them about the work they're going to do. Most people go into law, but prior to that, most lawyers eventually go into law, but before that, they study something else. And I'm always curious what kind of things they get in those 4 years prior to law school, because whichever it is, it's formulate who you became, what kind of lawyer you became. These are the seeding ground of, and then you cultivate the law on top of. That's my feeling about why I like to get to know someone's educational background in undergrad studies. Because do you feel that effect and it provides you some foundation for later on when you study law?
Well, yes and no. I mean, of course, undergraduate training is valuable and necessary usually to profit from law school. In my particular case, what had happened was I fortunately went to an excellent private school in Chicago. And I took a constitutional law seminar my second year of high school. And this was, in the early 70s. The civil rights movement was still kind of visible. And I was just fascinated by it. And I was sure I was going to be a lawyer fighting for civil rights, which I hope I sort of ended up doing. In college, I kind of got detoured in the sense that I got fascinated by social theory. And it had never occurred to me before that I wanted to teach social theory, or write it, more importantly. So that's what happened to me in college. But college, other than giving me further useful training, critical thinking, which lawyers should be doing, didn't really shape my direction in the law. In fact, it kind of pulled me away from it a little bit.
Well, what I find interesting is that you seem very academic inclined. You almost wanted to teach as a professor. So, more of a scholarly pursuit than litigation, which is a completely different area. One is much more ivory tower and organize and order, and the other one is somewhat chaotic. Although appellate law, you got to have some rules, but still it's litigation, and there are a lot of interpretation that you do as an appellate attorney. As I understand, you have to explain and try to persuade the judges in appellate courts how you think they should interpret the law. Am I right?
Yes.
So, right. So that's kind of interesting to me. Although, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of these, if you were to become a professor or something like that, you probably would teach your students how to do some of the things that later on, if they become lawyer or appellate attorney, you probably would instruct them in similar way.
Similar. Basically, good appellate work, I think, is good critical reading and writing. And so, if you're studying history, if you're studying philosophy or sociology and doing it correctly, you're reviewing, why am I doing this? What's my defense of it? Why do I disagree with this other position? And how am I going to explain myself?
Mm-hmm.
And so those kind of broad critical skills, I think, are, the essence of appellate work, but a lot of kind of intellectual endeavors, I think.
If you were to teach lawyers, if you had become a professor, what subject of the law would you be teaching?
If I had been a professor, I would have been a professor of sociology. But were I to teach law, that's a good question. Maybe constitutional law and not separation of powers, but individual rights, the balances that have to be struck between the power of government and the power of individuals and the power of, say, organized private entities like corporations and labor unions and religions.
Mm-hmm. You're on Rainier Avenue Radio. This is Afternoons with Monique. I have appellate attorney Randy Baker on today to share with us a little bit about his work as an appellate attorney in both California and Washington State, where he currently practices. We'll have about 40 minutes, 39 minutes, with one break at 2:27 to 2:30. And in the second part of the show, I'll ask Attorney Baker about his thoughts on the Supreme Court decisions recently, the U.S. Supreme Court decisions recently, and some of their predisposition. And also, we're going to talk about Washington State and California appellate and Supreme Court in the 38 minutes coming up next. So let me ask you this about the kind of people that come to you for appeals. Let's talk about what type of law you typically help people with. Let's start with that.
Well, the crushing majority of my cases are court-appointed felony appeals, mostly from California, more recently, the Western District of Washington Federal Court.
Mm-hmm.
And I practice in the Ninth Circuit here. Well, the Ninth Circuit covers the whole West Coast, and in California courts of appeal, principally in San Jose and San Francisco. Otherwise, my main clients are private clients, and they're usually plaintiffs in civil rights suits, especially employment discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been my focus, and I've had some limited experience at the trial level.
So I will want to know a couple of the cases that you had worked on or argued in front of appellate courts in a minute. But I want to know, I would like to ask you to share with our audience the landscape of the appellate court and appellate law, which is the middle layer between Superior and Supreme Court. This is the stage where after a trial, where you have either a jury or a bench trial, which is a judge decided your case. And if you disagree with the judge or the jury about the outcome of the case, you have the right within, I believe, 20 days to appeal to the next court, a higher court, which is appellate court. And of course, just for a quick, brief history, overall review of the different courts we got Superior Court or District Court on the federal side. Am I right? And then you have Appellate Court and then Supreme Court. And on the federal side, you have District Court, then Appellate Court up on the federal side, and then the U.S. Supreme Court. Am I getting that?
That's basically right. There's some specialized courts in which I don't practice, patent courts, I believe, in the federal system. And in Washington, I think you mentioned district courts, which are below the Superior Court. And similarly in California, I forgot what it's called, but there's a court below the Superior Court. And actually people can appeal, and I don't do those appeals, from these lower courts to the superior court. So the superior court sometimes acts as a reviewing court for these lower courts. I have no experience with that though.
Okay. So by the time someone is done with a trial, both sides got their own attorneys arguing for them. They spend a bunch of money with the lawyers and the court and the witnesses and the expert witnesses. Then they get to the appellate. Quite a sum of money, unless you're a criminal and you provided for with a public defender, in which you get someone to work on your case at no cost or low cost, right? So litigation can get expensive, and so by the time someone get to you and finish their trial work, your role is to first educate and learn to see whether the case has a chance to win, to prevail on appeal. Am I right?
That's right. And I spend a lot of my time with prospective clients talking them out of it. Meaning most appeals lose. It's very uphill. And it's for both good and bad reasons. The good reason is usually there are some mistakes at the trial level, but they don't matter. Meaning they're the kind of mistakes that if the judge had done it right, you still would have lost. So that's kind of a good conservatism. Cases shouldn't go on forever. There's no point in going to the Court of Appeals and maybe getting a reversal if you're just going to get the same thing, same result anyhow, and plus the court won't reverse. The bad kind of conservatism is, I think there's two bad kinds. One is the reviewing courts, I think, overestimate the judgment of the lower court judges. And relatedly, I think judges in general, because my clients tend to not be wealthy, even if they can pay my fees, which often are significant, they're not rich. And usually, in the case of criminal defendants, they're poor and often people of color, and they're up against, the establishment, the system. And the judges identify with that, especially for a while in California when it seemed like almost all judges for a while had been prosecutors. But they also, they identify with employers rather than employees. Right.
The upper hand people, the people with the money or the power.
Yeah. And I think it's I have not encountered a judge personally where I think that judge is just cheating. They want their friend to win and they don't like this guy. I think it's subtler than that. It just, I understand that these are, the employers are good people. They have a hard business to run. And so they lean that way, but the outcome is still unfair for my client, even if they're not deliberately leaning against them. And I'm guessing if you ask them, they would say, no way. I'm
very fair, impartial.
That's right. And in fact, even judges who lean, towards employers or who lean towards the state against criminal defendants, those judges will be almost invariably can point to cases where they ruled against the employer for the employee, where they ruled against the government for the defendant. And so, they're not just pretending, there's some basis for their opinion. I just have a very different assessment of it than they do.
I understand. Well, the subtlety of not just the law, but the practice of law, as you just explained it, is very hard to discern and felt and understood by lay people such as myself, or maybe someone who's less astute about the law or have not studied it, or even studied the case in detail, not just studying the law or understand the law, have a law background, a JD, for example, but you too have to have the time and an interest to pay attention to the details that you are referring to. These are very subtle, like you said. So, which is why it is very interesting the appellate law, the appellate courts consider the kind of records that had to be submitted, everything written down so that you can search and find in writing. And we will resume our exciting and interesting story on appellate work from attorney Randy Baker, who is an attorney for both California State and Washington State appellate courts. Please give us 3 minutes break, and we will be back at 2:30, resuming our conversation on Afternoons with Monique.
Listening to Rainier Avenue Radio.world. Check us out on social media, Facebook and Instagram, Rainier Avenue Radio.world, and on Twitter at Rainier Ave Radio.
Ở Washington, hầu hết chúng ta đều đồng ý rằng con đường dẫn đến sự an toàn nhất là khi chúng ta đặt điện thoại ra khỏi tầm tay, nhưng điều đó không dễ làm. Vì vậy, hãy lan truyền thông điệp và làm gương. Trước khi bạn lên đường, đặt điện thoại của bạn vào hộp đựng găng tay, cài đặt nó với không làm phiền. Yêu cầu bạn bè và gia đình của bạn cũng làm như vậy. Bởi vì khi tất cả chúng ta đều làm phần việc của mình, sẽ tạo ra con đường an toàn hơn cho tất cả mọi người. Chúng ta hãy cùng nhau đến đó. Một thông điệp từ Ủy ban An toàn Giao thông Washington.
Kind of nonsense conversation we're having here.
The Neon Ghost Show. The Neon Ghost Show. Right here on Rainier. Wait, what's it? Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
Right about now.
Rainier Avenue Radio.world. I'm so tired.
The coronavirus is real. Let's be diligent about washing our hands. Did you know that this virus can live on surfaces for up to 9 days? That's why it's also important to disinfect things that an infected person might touch, like your cell phone. Even if you wash your hands often, when you pull out your phone, those germs go right back on your hands. When's the last time that you cleaned your phone? When the virus is spread by sneezing or coughing, those tiny airborne droplets eventually land on surfaces that you touch with your hands. On average, we touch our face 16 times an hour, which is why it's important to wash your hands and wipe down commonly used surfaces, including your cell phone. This message is a public service of Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
Hello, listener. What's important to you about what's going on in your community? Are you interested? Are you concerned? In any case, I invite you to tune into my show, Seattle Here and Now, on Rainier Avenue Radio.world. Why? I will be covering a wide range of topics important to you and impacting the community. Each show will have a special guest or guests to share with you information on a variety of subjects that are happening here and now in Seattle. I promise I will work hard to make my show informative, interesting, and entertaining. Be sure to listen to Seattle Here and Now on Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
Atlantic Street Center has been serving the children, youth, and families of the Seattle-King County area since 1910. We partner with families and communities to raise healthy, successful children and youth through services including counseling, early learning, youth development, domestic violence, and education support for school-aged children. Committed to serving the African-American community, Atlantic Street Center provides services and support for all marginalized people. Learn more at AtlanticStreetCenter.org.
You are listening to Rainier Avenue Radio,
your community radio station.
Welcome to Rainier Avenue Radio. This is Afternoons with Monique, recording live in Seattle, Washington, every Thursday at 1 p.m.
Welcome back to Afternoons with Monique, Seattle. Today, I have the pleasure of having an appellate attorney by the name of Randy Baker, who practices appellate law in both Washington State and California, coming on my show. But before we get him back on, I want to take a second to thank the following sponsors for helping and sponsoring and supporting the Afternoons with Monique show with our recent 100 episodes celebration of Afternoons with Monique. There are 6 sponsors. One is IBA, Seth Rudin, who does mergers and acquisition. We have Views Beauty School by Kim Nguyen, Stowe Developments and Strategies, leading by Bob Stowe, Windermere Real Estate by Kim Witzik in Kirkland, Mariana Veras from Mariana Strategic Real Estate, and Flygear and Associates Inc., National and Worldwide Services, recording and transcripts for the courts. Thank you. And we're back with Afternoons with Monique on Rainier Avenue Radio. Welcome back, Attorney Randy Baker from the Appellate Courts of California and Washington State. We were talking before the break about some of the cases, and well, we haven't gotten to the cases, but we were heading there. But the type of appeals and the odds of winning in with appeals, I've heard that 1 in 10 cases get reversed or something very, very low like that on appeals. Is that right? Am I quoting
You know,
correct number?
it varies a lot with the kind of case you're bringing. Perhaps for criminal appeals, it could be that low. For civil rights cases in federal court, I've looked at it recently. I think it's about 15%.
Wow.
But for other civil cases, I think it's a bit higher. I think maybe it's like a third. And it's going to vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. I think you can safely assume that the large majority of appeals do not succeed.
Right. So just to quickly recap, appellate law is the appellate court is the land where you, after a trial, a big trial with jury and judges on the superior court or district court level, and if the verdict is not satisfactory to some people, they want to appeal and they would seek an attorney such as Mr. Randy Baker here to assist them. And if that doesn't prevail, then you can always appeal to the higher court, which is the U.S. or the Washington State or California State Supreme Courts. Am I correct? And you are in that middle land, and occasionally you do assist people with supreme level work, or not at all?
Yes, I occasionally do. But you generally have a right if you lose a trial to appeal. If you lose an appeal, you have a right to ask permission to be heard by the Supreme Court of your state or the U.S. Supreme Court.
Right.
It's called petition for review or petition for certiorari. Those petitions are rarely granted, which means not only is it a long shot to win there, you probably can't even be heard there, because I think in California, it's like 3 or 5% of the petitions are granted, meaning just they'll hear your case, not that you win. I think the U.S. Supreme Court might be lower. Washington Supreme Court, I think, is 5 or 6%. I haven't looked recently, but it's a small percentage. And then once you got permission to appeal, I don't know, maybe 50 chance of success if they hear you. Right. Wow. Because if they hear you, you have raised, and the reason the numbers are so small is a legitimate one. The Supreme Courts can't review every mistake
case.
made by
There's
all
so
the courts of
many
appeal. That's not the job they view, and I think they're right. Their job is there some area of law that's unclear or needs to be fixed? That's what they're there for. And so when you're petitioning them, you're saying, yeah, in my case, the whole law is messed up. You need to fix it.
Right. Wow. So, that's very interesting. I've had 5 Supreme Court, Washington State Supreme Court justices on my show Afternoons with Monique since its inception, which was 2 years ago. And right before your episode, which is 101, Justice Mary Yu of the Washington State Supreme Court was on this show 2 weeks ago, talking about her work in the Washington State Supreme Court. So it is quite an honor. I mean, I hear you explain certain things that I previously wasn't even aware of just now. Of course, I don't practice law, and so every time I interview someone like you, I learn something new. So thank you for enlightening me and the public about the makeup, the chances of success, um, put into a frame to allow us, the public who didn't go to law school or practice appellate law, learn and understand a little bit about how this structure, and so they understand the chance of success on wishing for review being granted and all of that. So the next question I have, I saw a few of the cases that you went, you show on your website that you had worked on. Tell us about the Beth Sanders case that went to the Supreme Court, please.
Yeah. So Beth Sanders is my wife.
Oh.
And my wife went to a protest against the invasion of Iraq, whatever, 2003, 2004, I can't remember. She brought her then 10-year-old daughter with her. And I had experience bringing civil rights suits against the San Francisco police when I still lived in the Bay Area. Mm-hmm. And my wife's, we've both gone to lots of protests. We've never been arrested or anything. But since she had our 10-year-old with us, I just, and she had a protest sign, no war or something like that.
Right.
And I remembered from litigating against police that at protests, they would grab these things and sometimes arrest people and say, that was a weapon. And so I sort of half jokingly admonished her, that's a weapon, meaning stay away from police.
Yeah.
Because A, I don't want you being arrested, but B, if you are, I don't want our 10-year-old being held in God knows what kind of custody until I could get to her. So she comes home from the demonstration and she attended with another friend of ours and his 10-year-old, who's our daughter's buddy. And my wife had gotten into an argument with a security guard at Westlake Center. She was at Westlake Center with my friend and our children, waiting for the monorail to get to Queen Anne, which is where the protests began.
Mm-hmm.
She was standing there holding her sign up.
Mm-hmm.
And a private security guard in Westlake Center came up to her and said, lower your sign. And she said, no. And he said, well, you could hurt your daughter. And my wife said, I'm not going to hurt my daughter with the sign. And then he gave some other ridiculous thing. And she said, no. And he said, well, I'm going to have you removed.
Oh.
And so he brings in a bunch of other guys to remove her. And people in the crowd start getting around my wife to shield her. Mm-hmm. And she turns to our friend, who's actually a psychologist, and says, should I lower the sign? And he said, yeah, because our kids were both crying at that point.
Right. She's a tough cookie, isn't she? All right.
Pardon me?
She's a tough cookie.
Absolutely. I didn't have it any other way.
Yeah,
so anyhow, she tells my friend, don't tell Randy. Don't tell him about this because he warned me. And now nothing happened. She didn't get arrested. So anyhow, of course, our friend immediately blabs to me. And I wasn't angry. She didn't get arrested. And I know a lot of First Amendment law. And I was pretty certain, and I turned out right, mm-hmm. Even though she was in the Westlake shopping center, she was on public property. The public owned an easement because the monorail is public and you're going from the street. So it's the only way to get there.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided, well, she has a right to freedom of expression there.
Right.
So I sued them. And I sued the city and I sued the shopping center.
Mm-hmm.
And Judge Ehrlich heard the case. I thought he was very earnest. He was very theatrical about it. he said, okay, after he heard lengthy arguments from myself and the shopping center lawyers, the city lawyer didn't say that much. He said, I'm going to deliver my decision, a week or two later. And my daughter was in a small girls' school at the time, so we brought her class, and he theatrically delivered my loss. But he was very careful, and it seemed to me, and maybe I'm reading something into it, I think he thought I was right, but I think being a cautious fellow, he knew if he erred in favor of me, he would look really bad. Whereas if he erred on the side of the city in the shopping mall, that's kind of okay.
Yeah.
So anyhow, I'm sorry.
I understand how the politics of, being a judge and having to be around city, government people, they work around them, they're downtown. I don't know. If
Right. And I should add, though, I want to be careful. Judge Ehrlich didn't say that. I'm reading this in. I could have totally misunderstood it. So
it's a long time ago. You can talk about it now. I'm sure he won't be offended or picking a bone with you.
No, probably not. Anyhow, so I appealed, and before the Court of Appeals could hear the case, the Supreme Court just took it. So then I went to the Supreme Court, and I lost 7-2. There were two separate dissents, and the dissents were very passionate, explaining that, this is bedrock free speech. This is really a public place. And the majority said, we can't interfere with shopping. Shopping's very important. And
to America economy, right?
And these signs are very dangerous. And I'm sorry, I couldn't take that very seriously. But that was the story. It was a reasonable public safety measure, and
it's always interesting to me to read these opinions. Well, of course, now before I get into that, these opinions are typically drafted by clerks of the Supreme or the Appellate Court, right? And then they read it and approve, and then it became a decision that we, the public, get to read. You, the appellants or the respondents get to read, right?
That is my understanding. I think it varies a lot from judge to judge how much they assign to the clerks, how much they do themselves. But I think as a general rule, it's safe to assume that most appellate decisions are drafted by law clerks, and then the judges tweak as they see fit or don't tweak.
Right. So it's very interesting. Now you have another case you have many cases, but between 2002 to 2005, when you were a partner at Sheridan and Baker, which is your law firm with another partner, you represented whistleblowers and employment discrimination cases. Were there? I'm very interested, and we have a little time left for the Supreme Court stuff at the end there, so you got to time yourself here how much you would like to share. But I'm very curious about this aspect of law that you practiced in, and also FAM v. City of Seattle as well.
Yeah, my partner had that case before we joined, and then it continued basically in the appellate courts after I was partners with him. And I have to say that we had a lot of cases of employees against Seattle City Light. And I was actually stunned. I'm from Chicago, which is at least when I grew up, racism was pretty thick there.
Right.
My experience on the West Coast is much less bad than Chicago. And Seattle, on the whole, at least, I'm white. It doesn't look real bad. I know, the police department had to engage in a settlement with the federal government because of racist behavior against people of color. So I know it's not utopia. But no, I was stunned by how much racism there was at a public corporation. Seattle City Light is a public corporation by management against people of color. I mean, I can imagine, one or two cases like Pham and Lara. That was one case. We had a bunch of cases, and we didn't take cases both out of self-interest and just being honest lawyers. we didn't take cases that weren't meritorious.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very thick, and Seattle is probably less racist than most American cities, but at least while I was practicing with him, it's a real problem. Problem still.
So what happened in Pham's case? Could you just give us a quick synopsis?
Pham and Laura, the two plaintiffs, I haven't looked at this for a while. They were both denied promotions. They were the Seattle City Lights said, their exam scores were too low or something, and they weren't telling the truth. And my partner, before we were working together, he litigated the case and he won very good verdicts for both of them, substantial verdicts. So the city appealed, and then and I represented them on appeal, and I represented Pham and Laura on appeal, and we won. The city said that they had not adduced enough evidence of discrimination to win, that the jury was just irrational. And the Court of Appeal said, no, there was enough. And then, I remember now, we appealed an award of attorney fees, that it was inadequate, and won. And then we also appealed, there's a very technical kind of damage.
Washington law against discrimination are entitled to an income tax offset of non-economic damages among other holdings.
Yes. We won that. It hadn't been awarded, and the Court of Appeal said our clients were entitled to that. Unfortunately, the defendants took the case to the Supreme Court. They did not challenge the Court of Appeal's decision that there was sufficient evidence, but they did challenge the appeal that we brought for attorney fees and this non-economic damage offset. And at that point, we had split up. My partner litigated the Supreme Court part. He won the attorney fee part, but he lost the offset for non-economic damages.
Right. So. I hate to leave this subject. I do want to know about this fee multiplier and the base attorney fee award to be increased approximately $400,000 in this case. What is that attorney fee multiplier? And
so
what is the
multiplier is awarded? I think there's two circumstances. Maybe it's just either difficulty of the case or risk. I think that's it. That's the principal one. It used to be, I think, a multiplier is, the court says, okay, you've been practicing in this area of law for 10 years, and you're considered a qualified or better than average qualified attorney. So someone at your level makes X $100 an hour, and that's considered the base. And we find, you worked 100 hours to 200 hours, and we decided that's reasonable. So the other side's got to pay you that.
Okay.
In addition, if the case is unusually risky or complicated, the court can say, you know what, above and beyond the call of duty, so to speak, we're going to give you 25% more or 50% more. So if you would have had 50,000, we're going to give you 75. I mean, that's the gist of it.
That's fascinating to me because, even within the judicial bloodstream, there's an element of capitalism encouragement.
Absolutely.
Right? So, I mean, I came from a capitalistic financial background, Wall Street background. So I understand about capitalism in America. It's good and bad, the positives and the negatives. And I have misgivings about our growth, forever expanding growth in America. But I also appreciate the opportunities that the growth in America afford, men and women. So, I'm full of conflicts, as you can tell, at all times. So now we're moving on from this local jurisdiction, Washington and the state level. Let me ask you your thoughts on the current Supreme Court decisions. Do you think that they are extreme?
Yes.
You do. Okay. How are they extreme?
Well, they're extreme in a couple ways, but the most obvious way is, there's a Latin term, and I don't know how to stare decisis, but courts are supposed to follow precedent. Now, the Supreme Court is the top dog, so they get to, do whatever they want, sort of.
Mm-hmm.
But as a matter of principle and as a matter of, having a coherent legal system,
mm-hmm.
when they make a ruling, they're not supposed to turn around the next day and say, oh, I didn't really like that very well. I
changed my mind.
Right. And the court did that a lot this time. They just changed their mind. And you need to have, there's sort of a consensus among, I think, lawyers and scholars that when they do that, there needs to be a really good reason. Like Plessy versus Ferguson said, legal segregation is constitutional. All right. That's a load. That's like a variation of slavery, right? That's unacceptable. So yeah, you overrule it because you screwed up badly the first time. That's manifest. What they're doing with Roe v. Wade, Miranda, you can't, that is not, let's say they're wrong, and I don't think they are wrong, but let's say they are wrong. Not in the ballpark with a moderate version of slavery. Not even arguable. And their defenses of it, I think even Justice Roberts, who voted to protect the law in issue, but did not vote to overturn Roe v. Wade.
Mm-hmm.
Not part, but they didn't need him. They had 5 votes. Even he pointed out their justification for just taking a precedent like that and throwing it in the toilet, saying, "Yeah, you're wrong," doesn't really withstand scrutiny. And I think it's fair to say Justice Roberts is a pretty conservative guy. I mean, I consider him quite extreme. It's just they're
more so than Justice Thomas, Clarence Thomas?
I'm sorry. Roberts is the one I consider extreme. Thomas and Alito, they're just like in another universe. I don't know who even speak English.
Well, just to play at devil's advocate here for a second, Roe v. Wade had been around for 49 years, and at the time, the support for it is great and was new. And some people might say, the experimentation has run its course. 50 years is a long time for you to try something out. How about letting the pendulum swing the other way? Now, previously we had a very democratic, but also democratic, but liberal stand, and supporting women's rights, supporting gay rights. Now we have a lot of very liberal ideologies coming up, and it gets to the point maybe it hit the middle and further the part of the pendulum. Maybe some people say it's too much. We can't take it anymore. It's too liberal. We wanted the pendulum to go the other way now. Let's try the other way now. We get a chance to go that way. You guys got your chance for 49 years. Now it's our turn. What do you think about that argument?
Well, I think we abolished slavery, and it's had a long, we've let it 150 years without slavery. Let's go back a little, because some of us, think slavery was kind of cool. I don't.
We got Mexican and immigrants coming in. It's not the new. No, this is completely tongue-in-cheek, in jest here. But I'm an immigrant myself. I know about working for low wages to start your career and all that. So, well, my producer just alerted me that we only have 1 minute left, so I'm going to get off the podium here and let you have any closing thoughts that you want to share with our audience.
None, except I appreciate your letting me on. And I, you mentioned earlier that, you're not a lawyer, your audience aren't lawyers mostly. A lot of the stuff we're talking about, I don't think what I've been saying is so sophisticated or complicated, but it's not widely known. And I think that points to a failure of our education system. This basic stuff about, what happens in courts, you don't need to be a lawyer to know that. And people should know that, because my business is too much mysticism, like it's all rocket science. And the bread and butter of it isn't.
Right. Well, I appreciate you coming on Afternoons with Monique and share your wisdom, your education, what you know, your knowledge with me and my audience. I appreciate you. Thank you, Randy, for coming on my show.
Thanks. It was fun.
All right. So next week we will have Port of Seattle Commissioner Sam Joe coming on to share with us about his work at the port. It is 2:57. Everyone, have a great afternoon and stay hydrated and shaded under this heat. All right. Have a good afternoon.